Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Fertile Dark. I'm your host, Daniel, and today I have some exciting news to share with you. As you know, this podcast is dedicated to exploring profound insights and practical tools from the realms of psychology and spirituality to help you on your quest for personal transformation and self-discovery. In our ongoing journey to bring you the best content possible, I'm thrilled to announce a significant addition to our podcast team. Starting next week, I will be joined by a new co-host, Krista Nichols, who brings a wealth of knowledge and a truly beautiful and unique perspective that will undoubtedly enrich our discussions and deepen our explorations into the fertile dark. And I really can't wait for you to meet her and hear the incredible insights that she has to offer. So stay tuned for our next episode where we will introduce Krista and dive into an exciting new topic together. I'd also like to thank you for your continued support of this project. I know the last few weeks I've been less consistent with a variety of different challenges that have cropped up, but I look forward to continuing to embark together on this journey. Today, we have the incredible honor of hosting a truly inspiring artist whose music and journey really resonate deeply with the essence of the human experience. Joining us is Jemma, who is a remarkable singer-songwriter and a counseling psychology student. Her music is a heartfelt invitation into the raw, beautiful, and expansive depths of our shared humanity, where she offers a sanctuary for the soul. And Caitlin's latest album, A Wider View, is a testament to the belief that music is medicine. The album is a profound exploration of grief, loss, and forgiveness created in the wake of her father's passing that guides listeners through an emotional landscape, encouraging them to face and integrate their own stories of pain and resilience with grace and honesty. And beyond her musical creations, Caitlin is also a dedicated teaching artist. She leads workshops on lyric writing and the creative process of transmuting grief, helping people to capture the large, complex ideas of grief and the human experience into small, beautiful vignettes that resonate really deeply. Caitlin's work really transcends performance. It's a heartfelt call to embrace our mortality and live a life that's full of purpose and connection. And her commitment to authenticity and emotional honesty, paired with her academic pursuits in psychology, make her a truly unique and powerful voice in the world of music and beyond. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming the incredibly talented and inspiring Jemma. One of the things that you've said is you've described your music as medicine, which has felt really accurate to me as I've listened to your music. I am curious about your perspective on music as medicine. How would you really describe that?
The image that comes to mind, and this is like, by the way, a really cool time to be talking with you because I'm in my childhood bedroom right now. And so the image that comes to mind is like when I was a little kid, I had a stereo and I would have CDs and I would listen to music all the time on the stereo. And, like my room and the music became my safe haven from like whatever was happening outside of this door. That could just happen and that could just be as it was. But I had a safe place to go. And that's why I think music from a very early age has been really healing for me. It's a place that I can go to when I need comfort, when I need a new perspective, when I need to just like have fun or like get out of my head for a little bit or feel seen by someone else's story or experience. And so I've always connected with music like that. And it's been a real gift to have been, received the skill of music in this life, because especially as I've been doing this grief record and I've been performing it live, I noticed there was a shift in like performances I was doing beforehand to now that I'm doing this grief work and music, is that grief touches us all. Like, it doesn't matter like the story behind it, but it's like when I perform these songs now, they are this kind of medicine for people. And the medicine is kind of like it's the medicine of being with. So it's not about solving or fixing. It's just this acknowledgement of like, oh yeah, grief exists and it's okay that it exists, and it's okay to be seen in experiences that we feel ashamed to talk about or feel nervous to be seen.
Do you have like specific examples that come to mind that you feel like really capture that idea?
Yeah, there was actually a guy who was at my show earlier this year who I was doing this intimate, like kind of house concert show. And there was a guy in the audience who just seemed very visibly uncomfortable by my songs, and was kind of like, he was kind of bantering a little bit at me. You know, I would kind of say, this song's about grief, or this song's about acknowledging depression or trauma or whatever. And he would kind of like make like a joke about it, or be like, oh boy, like here we go. Or he'd say something like that. And it was sort of distracting, but I was able to kind of laugh along with him because I was like, oh yeah, like I could see that he was uncomfortable with his own stuff around that. And so in my mind, I thought, man, this guy really hates me. I'm like, he hates this experience. He doesn't want to be at this show. This isn't what he signed up to do tonight. And at the end, he came up to me and I said, well, how was that for you? And he was like, well, it brought up a lot. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, he told me that it had brought parts of my performance had brought him to tears. And he shared some experience he's had as a veteran and being in war. And, you know, he told me like, I've killed people. And I think he wanted to sort of shock me with that information. And it didn't shock me in the way I thought that he thought it might have a certain impact that it didn't. And so it was this really amazing gift and practice to like, for each of us to be with the experience that was coming up for us. And stuff like that just didn't happen when I was doing my breakup songs or whatever. You know, like people weren't compelled to tell me their really their shadows, you know, or things that they're wrestling with. And so yeah, I feel really grateful that this music has come in this way, because it's connected me to people's stories and their truth and things that they feel ashamed to talk about.
That's really powerful.
Yeah. I had no idea that was going to happen. So it's been great.
I wonder what it is about the difference in the quality of your music now versus before that you feel like enables people to open up with you and connect with you about these experiences.
Well, I think it's just what they say about vulnerability, which is if you're vulnerable, then you give other people permission to be vulnerable. Which is why I really like the line of work that we're pursuing, and you know, the music and all that stuff that goes along with it, which is like, we all have stuff under the surface. Each one of us does. And what we really need in this life is just permission for it to be okay. And so I think the music is giving people permission of like, oh, I haven't allowed myself to feel that or think about that or tell that side of my story. And I didn't get the courage to even tell this side of the story until I joined my 12-step program, Adult Children of Alcoholics, like back in 2020. And I remember the first meeting there were people who were being so vulnerable about their stories. And this was stuff that I'd really never talked about with anyone except my therapist or like very close friends. And here I am in this group of strangers and they're like spilling their guts, you know? And so I have to thank ACA for that, for giving me the courage to share that part of my story. It's funny too, because I had so much anxiety making this record. So much anxiety come up about like, why am I sharing this part of myself? And then once it's out, it was an actual release. And it was like, I feel proud now and I don't feel scared. So it's this whole process of like confronting your fears. And if you confront your fears and you're vulnerable, it inspires other people to do that too.
Yeah, what a really powerful journey to go on. I think about both of these stories you just shared of going to these ACA meetings as well as having this veteran come up and talk to you. And I think about myself in both of those circumstances and how hard it is for me to express vulnerability around those things. So,
well, I think like anything, vulnerability is a skill to learn, you know, because it's like, I think there's a reason why we don't feel safe to share these sorts of things. And so it, like, for me, vulnerability has been this skill I've had to develop where I kind of, okay, I'm going to express something and, oh, it was safe and it went well and I got supported. Okay, now I'm going to try again. And you just kind of keep practicing at it. And I don't know, I just feel like it goes well more times than it doesn't.
It feels to me like people deeply want to feel connected to each other. Like they deeply want that space to be vulnerable. And so in having somebody else be vulnerable, it's a permission slip to say, oh, it's safe here to have the real conversation. Like I'm willing to take a step and give you that permission to show up as yourself and to say what's really on your heart, what's really in your mind.
Where do you find that safety to be vulnerable? What places in your life?
That's a great question. I feel like there honestly haven't been that many until recently. So with my partner, there's been that. And that was a thing that was learned over time. I remember one of our first dates together. I can't remember exactly how it came up. We'd gone to something and we were actually sitting on the curb in the parking lot for probably like 2 hours after this thing. And I remember just sharing with her a little bit as a way to see like, how is this going to be held? And then it was okay. And then I shared a little bit more and then it was okay. And I was like, okay, I feel done for now. But that was kind of the process over time. And then there were a lot of experiences where it wasn't okay to be vulnerable until I think we're starting school here, where it was okay to say, here's my story. And then it didn't faze people other than to say like, wow, like that's a lot. Let me help you hold that.
Yeah.
So it was really a learned skill. But I think I didn't really seek people out who could hold it. It was almost like a defense mechanism to say like, I don't feel okay. And I'm going to have a self-fulfilling experience where I say, well, I'm going to hang out with people who can't hold this.
That's interesting that it was reflected in your relationships in that way. Yeah, I'm in my hometown, which is near Reno, Nevada, and there's like loads of drinking and like, you know, just kind of like there's like drinking culture and gambling culture and it's been interesting to kind of be who I am back in my hometown and notice that there's a lot of trauma in my hometown and there's a lot of not talking about it, but then noticing that it spills out the sides. And I think because I'm a good listener and I'm interested in people's stories, that people in my hometown have started to kind of like tell me a lot in like a kind of inappropriate context at times, which is interesting because I think about that as just like a cultural issue at large. Like there aren't enough spaces in America where it's like, okay, we have this container and we have this group. And like that veteran I talked with you about, he was like, I don't need therapy, like he was kind of, bashing therapy, which is fine. Not everyone like needs or wants therapy. But there's still this real stigma about, yeah, like getting support in whatever way that looks like. And so my observation being home was like, it still ends up spilling out the side. Like someone gets too drunk and then they're telling me about their trauma. And, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, there's still this real desire and longing to connect and to be real. But there's not a container in America enough for those kinds of spaces. And so it's like, comes out at the bar or it doesn't come out, it like stays inside.
I mean, like in the military perspective, I one of the things that I did was I went to jump school.
Mm-hmm.
And so got to do static line parachuting, which is both one of the scariest things I've done because I'm scared of heights, and also one of the most amazing things I've done.
Yeah. Wow.
And one of the experiences I had was on an annual health check. I marked that at one point in time, I had seen a therapist. Instantly, I got pulled off of jump status.
Whoa.
And it was for a visit with a therapist that had happened over a decade prior. And because it was for PTSD, they said, you can no longer be on jump status.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so you have these kinds of experiences where it is stigmatized, where there are these negative consequences for being vulnerable. And by saying, yeah, actually, I've got a problem, they say, wow, you can't do this thing. Or then there's also I feel like there's a lot of humor or attempts at humor around vulnerability and around therapy specifically that says this isn't okay.
Man, that's so unfortunate. I wonder what kinds of spaces would look like. Those spaces would look like if vulnerability was a normalized thing, and it like what you were saying earlier, like it's a defense, like to make fun of it or to badmouth it or whatever. It's a defense when really it's like therapy and vulnerability and whatever, like group support. It's like so transformative that I feel like that stigma, it's so misinformed about what it actually is. And I guess we have come a long way in there as therapy being, seen as more of a normal thing nowadays, but there still is, a culture of idea around what it means.
Yeah. Oh, I'm curious because you also do workshops. And I wonder, what does it look like in those workshops to create that kind of container where it is safe to be vulnerable, and how does that impact the people in the space?
Well, because I do like grief writing workshops, and then I do a grief open mic night. And I think that the people that come to those spaces are already willing to be vulnerable, but it still comes up where there's a lot of shoulds or should nots that come up around one's process. And that's curious to me. And, when it happens for me, also, I have to look at that. Like, especially with grief, if you like, it can come out of nowhere for no reason. Right. And so there's even been times this year where I go, I shouldn't be feeling this way. There's no reason. There's no anniversary. There's no date. It's like being willing for it to just be and come as it is a big piece that I work with. And it's like, I'm not going to glorify vulnerability, like it is a initiation and it's a beautiful process. And it's also really hard and confronting and not fun sometimes. And I feel like you have to go easy on yourself with just like what you said earlier with telling your partner like little things and then that being okay. And then opening up a little bit more just to like Yeah, see your process as a flower that's opening, and it's not going to open overnight. It's just like, okay, let's start with one petal and like see how that happens. And yeah.
Well, for you, like, what is that process? Like, what are some things that you do to help you with that? I mean, because
Yeah.
you released this whole album to the world, which feels quite vulnerable.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
and like, what does that look like? How does somebody do that, going from a place of being so armored up that they can't be vulnerable to this place of very open vulnerability?
Well, creativity is just such the best companion um that I've discovered to work with that, because it's like I realized this part of my story of growing up with an alcoholic father and growing up where there was domestic violence. That was a part of my story that really was a huge part of how I developed in the world. But I was keeping that out of my music for a very, very long time, and intentionally, because I was like, oh, like no one can hear about that. That's too personal. But then when I started going to ACA, I realized like, oh, nothing is actually too personal. And maybe, and this first song, It's Not Too Late, came through. And I had a mentor at the time who later became my producer. I remember sharing with him this song. And I was like, I wrote this song after going to ACA and I feel really, really, really scared about it. And he asked me to play it for him, and I did. And he was like, "Oh, that's an amazing song. You have to record that." And it was just this, there was this process. Anytime I went to the studio to record this record, it was like I didn't want to do it. I had so much resistance. It was not a fun process for me. And at the same time, like being in the studio was not usually very fun for me, but then getting the songs back later and going on a walk and listening to them, it was like, oh, this is how I'm processing the time in my life and my childhood. And this is how I'm learning to forgive my dad and my family and for myself. And by facing it head on, I'm actually getting to transform through it. And so it wasn't this like decision that I made before the album, but it was this kind of subconscious process where I learned along the way, okay, when I step towards this instead of away from it, that I learn so much about myself. And then I get the bonus of connecting with others in a really deep way. And there's actually, and I have to like credit Savage Garden for this because there's a track on one of Savage Garden's records called Two Beds and a Coffee Machine. And it's a song about how he grew up in domestic violence, and his dad was abusing his mom, and they had to go and stay in a hotel for the night. And I remember being a kid and listening to this song. And, Savage Garden was a major pop band, and they had this song on their record that was talking about domestic violence. And I never forgot about that song because I thought to myself, like, okay, I remember being like 10 years old and listening to this song and feeling so held. And if I could do that for somebody else, if I could give that gift to somebody else through my music, I'm willing to go through the resistance and the fear and all the stuff that's coming up for me around making this music and telling this part of my story. I realized throughout that process, it's not about me, it's about this other person that's on the other side of this song that like really needs this. So thank you, Savage Garden, for doing that for me. And it was just kind of this like, I'm going to pay it forward and I'm not going to make it about me anymore. And especially now that it's out, I'm not scared about it being out. I'm really happy that it's out. The process of making it was terrifying and I hated it. I mean, I love certain parts of it too, but it was just very confronting. But yeah, but I love it so much. I love that I have this piece of work now that I can share with people like, oh, you are experiencing these things. I have something that might help you. And now it's just like, it's like giving someone a book that really changed your life. And I don't know. So it's this gift that I'm really excited to just have out and have it not be about me anymore.
I mean, as I've listened to the album, there have been songs that I've really resonated with, that I felt really captured my experience in a way that felt really important. Like, oh, yes, no one has really been able to express it in just that way before. And that's been a really beautiful thing to have and feel like it's a gift that's been given to the world. To be able to go through your own experience in a way and come out of the other side with such a beautiful offering. Like, it makes me think of Michael Meade talking about this idea of the wounded healer. That as we pass through the wound, then it enables us to heal others. But we got to pass through it first.
The hero's journey.
Yeah.
Yes. I love that.
You keep talking about the difficulty of the experience of this recording process, of this like writing and recording and producing. I wonder, what are some things that you learned about yourself through that process?
That I can do hard things.
Okay.
That I can do the hardest things. And also that it's okay to be witnessed in your sorrow and your grief and the things that you feel ashamed about. Like, because there was times when I was in the studio where I couldn't even sing because I was just crying so much. And I would there was this really powerful moment where we were recording in San Francisco, and there's a song on the record that's just me on acoustic guitar. And it's like very bare bones, and it's about me, being at my dad's bedside as he was passing, and how I learned to really appreciate what I have when I have it and who I'm with, and just to have that presence. And I was in the studio and I was trying to record this song, and it was like, I just kept having to stop and cry. And I felt really embarrassed because I was like, I'm wasting my engineer's time, or I'm wasting other people's time. And then finally, like, I was just in the vocal booth, and they were kind of away in this other room, but they could still hear me. And I just said, I think what I needed to do is actually just talk to my dad right now. And so I said, just leave the microphone on, and then when I'm ready, I'll start the song. And I had this like 15-minute monologue that I didn't end up putting on the record, but I have it for me. And it was just this verbal processing about what it meant to see him at the end of his life, and what it meant to love someone that struggled with addiction and struggled with anger, and then also to go through this process of like forgiving him and seeing the things that I really loved and admired about him, and to feel this missing and longing for what we had and what we didn't have. And it was just kind of this moment of, I need to be okay with other people being uncomfortable. And if this is uncomfortable for them, they don't have to listen to it. They don't have to stay in the studio. But I need to stop holding myself back out of fear that others are going to be uncomfortable. And I feel like that what it takes is a lot of like somatic body awareness, because there's this anxiety that comes up of like, ooh, I better shield this person from my experience because it will be too much for them. Maybe they'll think I'm weird, or they'll think I'm, something too much related. And then to just kind of be like, actually, I'm going to give them a chance to make their own call about what it is they need. And if it is too much for them, then they're adults and they can take care of themselves. It's not my responsibility. What is my responsibility is to show up authentically and truthfully and share my story and give voice to things that have had no voice or have been pushed into shadow. And so that's like, I mean, now I forget what the question was, but that was the story that came to mind.
No, that's beautiful. I feel a lot of resonance in myself with the fears and anxiety they expressed. And I think it is relatively common to put ourselves in a place where we're protecting other people. We're so focused on other people at the expense of ourselves. I wonder, what are some things that you've done to help you develop some awareness around that and be able to move past that place or move through that place?
Well, I think it's this balance, right? Because you don't want to be sharing in a context where, like what I talked about, like in my hometown, where people get really drunk and then they tell me really intense things that I'm not really prepared to listen to at that moment, or it's not the right context. But I think so. There's some consent involved in that, but I think it's like trusting yourself that that you can be held in that space, and that if it makes someone uncomfortable, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That discomfort can actually, like going back to that veteran person, like he was uncomfortable at my show, but that doesn't mean that it was bad or that he hated it or he wanted to leave. Those were all the thoughts that were coming up in my mind. Like, oh my God, this guy wants to leave. But he didn't leave, and he actually stayed and he talked with me after. So it's this practice of giving people the opportunity to show up for themselves, and to, like having awareness and respect of other people, but to know that discomfort isn't a bad thing. And that you really can't, it's really hard to tell sometimes, uh, especially in this grief work. Like I run these open mics, and sometimes I'm like, oh my God, I did the worst job facilitating or something, or, whatever gatekeeper voice comes up. And I've been practicing to just kind of dial that down a little bit, because that's taking away from my presence, right? And I'm not really allowing the full expression of what it could be for somebody else, because there might be a lot of discomfort, but underneath that there might be something that's really churning in them, that's important for their experience. Or it might come in the next week where they're like, man, that meeting was really intense, or that song was really confronting. But then in a week's time or in a day's time or whatever, that it sort of seeps in a little bit, and maybe something transforms in a new way. And so I think, yeah, it's just having that awareness of yourself, and then also, allowing people to have their experience.
Yeah, there's like an allowance for space for multiple things to be there at the same time. I guess I'm just reflecting on an experience. I just had this experience. So in a different way, but it was just being able to sit with the different things that came up and allow space for all of it to be present. Which meant that for a little bit there, I just cried. And then after a little bit of that just being allowed to be present, then there's experience of moving into a place of wisdom. I was like, I had to pass through the gate of grief to get to a place of wisdom.
Yeah. Grief is such an initiation point. I think that's why I'm obsessed with it now.
Yeah. Tell me more about that. Grief as an initiation. What do you mean when you say that?
Well, my very personal experience, I had a dad who struggled with alcohol and anger and all this stuff. And I really resented a lot of his behavior and really struggled with forgiving him, and wanted to forgive, but I couldn't, because there was just something blocking that. And when he was passing, we both started to change in very significant ways, where all of a sudden he's like resting a lot more, and his mind is a lot more calm. He knew he was at the end of his life, so he had a lot of, gratitude and love rise up to the top, and a lot of like I never really got to be close with my dad, and all of a sudden every day I'm sitting at his bed holding his hand and like brushing his hair and like having these very sweet, intimate moments that I longed for as a child, that like now as a 31-year-old I'm getting to experience. And so that was super, super healing for me. And it was an initiation point, because it was like I had a choice at that moment, which was I can continue to be resentful of this person, or I can be present and I can forgive, and I can see that his issues and his lack of presence and, really terrifying behavior at sometimes had nothing to do with me, and was an expression of his grief and his trauma. And it's like really it's not fair to like put all that on a child. Like I don't like we just can't understand that as a child. And so then my other part of my initiation was like I've got to forgive the part of myself, the child part of myself, that's like still really angry and protective and took things really, really personally. And so in the 10 days of him like being at ICU and then being at hospice and at home, I went from like being really angry and resentful to then at the end having almost like, I describe it as like Buddhist like compassion. Like it felt like something from above, from heaven, just came over me and gave me the gift of forgiveness and gave me the gift of presence. And then I was truly able to be there with him in love, and only love and compassion. And that happened in 10 days. Like, that's crazy to me, because for 30 years of my life, I'd been trying to reckon with this relationship and forgive this person and really struggling. And then in a week and a half, it was like, okay, now everything's changed. The heartbreak in that is that and it's a beautiful thing, but it's heartbreaking that it has to happen, or it had to happen at the end of his life, because I would have loved to have that sort of experience, and then we could carry on and have this wonderful relationship. And we do now in spirit world, but like, I don't know, like since that moment, and it has a big piece obviously to like heal my father wounds, but then it also changed me. It gave me this point of initiation to look at my own life and to ask myself, what kind of person do I want to be? Do I want to be a person that harbors resentment and that can't forgive and that like holds on to things? Or do I want to carry, because that feeling of forgiveness was so healing and so strong, and I really felt like I experienced a version of enlightenment for a short period of time, that I felt very, very free and very peaceful. And I thought to myself, well, I don't want it to end here. I don't want it to just be this week that I feel this, heightened sense of love and compassion. I want that to be my work and my life and my person. And so part of that now has become holding grief space for others. And that's what kind of like become obsessed with it, because I'm like, okay, I think there's something to this, of working with this end of life and grief processing, that deeply changes us and gives us this perspective that we don't have as much time as we think we do. And those relationships that feel really hard and that we're reckoning with, like, is there any part of me that I can adapt or change to show up for this person, even if they're like really hard for me to deal with. And I am not a master of that, but I have a tiny bit of practice in it. And it's really changed my relationship with my mom. And so now it's like, yeah, my mom really annoys me sometimes, but I'm able to kind of have a little bit more humor with it and look at her and be like, man, she's 72 now. How do I want to spend the rest of our life and our time together? I don't want to be resentful or carrying all this baggage. I want to just kind of take things a little less personally. Yeah.
It's so powerful. Thank you first for sharing that. It's like, yeah, feel that one deep inside.
Yeah.
It also made me think of something that Michael Meade talks about, just in like hearing you describe this before and after. He just says that in parts of Africa, what they say is, in order to grow a bigger life, a person has to brush against death. And for me, as you were describing brushing your dad's hair, like you were literally brushing against death.
Yeah.
And here you are now in this place of not just being bigger in the world, but in helping other people to also be bigger through these spaces that you hold.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that and seeing it that way, because I've kind of been in this weird like chapter recently where I've and I don't know how long this phase will last, but that my grief feels sort of in a more peaceful place right now, in an acceptance phase. And so I was getting worried that I was like, oh, I want to get my PhD in grief, but what if I don't have energy or passion behind it anymore because I'm not in that intensity of it? But then as I've been having those questions arise, in the last few days, someone told me, oh, you're really good at grief, or they told me about someone who's passed, or it's been coming to me. And it's like, I don't know exactly what I'm trying to get at here, but it's something to do with, I wouldn't be able to hold that space for others if I hadn't walked through it myself. And then the other thing that I'm learning with grief is like, it's all okay. And that, yes, I'm in a peaceful, accepting state right now where I'm not like, there's not a lot of intense energy coming up. But that doesn't mean that I've lost the passion or desire to like work with this as my career and like as my passion. So yeah, I'm curious your thoughts about that. Like, I don't know, as you go through the path of therapy, like, do you ever get scared? Like, am I going to lose interest, or what comes up around that?
I find that oftentimes that when I feel interest waning, it's because there's something that's knocking at the door that I'm not wanting to look at.
So it tends to look like a disinterest when it's more like a invitation.
It's more, I'm looking away from the invitation. But in looking away from the invitation, I'm actually looking away from myself. And it's hard to feel connected to myself if I'm not willing to look. So for me, that looks like never sitting still. I just grind myself to dust because then I'm too busy and too tired to actually look and to actually listen. And then when I slow down, then it can be so intense. And so just even in this last week, I've been really working on creating more space for that tension to be present. And it's come up in some really interesting ways. Like my partner and I sitting down to watch the Great British Baking Show, and then I just start crying. This cake is so beautiful, and I don't know why I'm crying. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Like, oh, we got a handshake. Oh my gosh, I'm melting. Or like, it's just so wonderful to be here. And there's just so much. And I'm like, why am I feeling so emotional right now? And it's that I'm finally sitting still.
Interesting.
And then when I allow myself to feel it, it's my enthusiasm doubles down. And then as I dig into it even more, then my enthusiasm increases even more.
Interesting. Yeah. It's interesting that, that being with it actually grows your enthusiasm and your passion. Yeah. And it's something happened the other day where this thought came where it's like, oh, I think I'm losing interest in the grief work, and that feels really scary because, well, then what's my path? And then I went to go bartend at my buddy's bar, and I was kind of grumpy that morning, and I was like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm doing. And this guy came in to get a drink, and he was telling me just about his life and how his wife had passed 8 years ago. And then all of a sudden I saw myself switch on, and I just became like really engaged with him. And what was your wife's name? And tell me about that and all this stuff. And then I was like, oh, it's still here. Like, it's definitely still here. So there was this kind of confirmation that to not kind of buy into, if that disinterest comes up, to take it at face value, but to instead be like, oh, like, maybe I'm uncomfortable. Whoa, I'm blowing my own mind right now. Maybe I'm uncomfortable with the fact that I feel at peace with it. Because that's a new feeling, like, and I can feel myself getting emotional right now. Like, I'm uncomfortable with being at peace with my dad's death, because then it's like, am I going to forget? Am I going to lose him again? Or am I going to lose this gift of the experience that I had over the last year and a half that was so transformative? Like, am I going to lose that? Like, I don't know that I want to be at peace, because if I'm at peace with it, if I'm okay with it, then maybe all of that just vanishes. So that's something to look at.
Yeah, that's a great question.
But then I also think about, the 5 stages, and one of the stages is acceptance. And it's my view, it's my opinion that they don't happen in a linear way. Like, I just had anger come up the other day, for example, and now I'm in the acceptance moment. So I think more of those stages of grief is more like moments or chapters. And then also I'm reading a book by Francis Weller right now, and he talks about the gates of grief, which I love that idea that it's a passage point, and it's kind of like this it's like the trail we're walking. It's called The Wild Edge of Sorrow is the book. We live in a very linear minded culture, and so, but it doesn't apply to emotions, right? So this thinking mind wants to put some linear around, like, okay, it's been a year and a half. I should be at this place, or like, applying this linear way of thinking when I don't know what's going to happen next week with, like, maybe I'm going to see something that reminds me of my dad, or hear a song and it's going to make me cry, and I'm not going to feel peaceful in that moment. I'm going to feel tormented, And that's something that I love about working with grief, is that it teaches you to be with, and you have to just drop the judgment as much as possible, because it's not about judging. It's just about being with and having a sense of presence. And that's why I think it's a very spiritual path too, because I'll tell you that like, my dad died in October 22, and I've been thinking about going to grad school during the pandemic, and I didn't, and I didn't, and I didn't. And then after he passed, like, something he was saying while he was passing was, he kept saying, I wish I had more time. And that really affected me, because I'm turning 33 next month. Like I, have lots of time theoretically, but I also at the same time don't. And so when he passed, I was like, within the month of his passing, I'd applied to go to grad school, and I had started the process of breaking up with my relationship and moving out. And then I moved again I switched cities. I live in LA now. And I kind of have just been on this roll of like, okay, let's update everything in my life, and let's keep ourselves out of stagnation. And I think that's like the momentum that loss gave me, is like, okay, you want to live a beautiful, fulfilled life, then you need to make these changes. Like, the changes you need to make, and so make them. You don't want to be like a person on their deathbed who's like, I wish I had more time, or I wish I could have done this. I really want to, like all of us want to pass in a way in which I'm looking back and like, wow, I did all of those things. I'm so glad that I made time for that.
Yeah.
And it's really, really changed what I prioritize now, which is very interesting.
How so?
Well, I used to just see my family like once a year, and now it's like, I don't want to miss a birthday. And I've been spending time with my mom for the last month. And, even though there's, even though there's things that I want to do for me, I'm bringing it more into balance, where I'm like, okay, it's important that I spend these birthdays with my family. It's important that I do the holidays, even though there's parts of my family that really annoy me to this day. I can deal with that. What I can't deal with is screwing off and then regretting that I didn't spend time with them, or that I didn't make a solid effort to heal, or to have those conversations that I wanted to have, or practice not taking things personally.
Yeah.
Because like part of those tough relationships, I think in family, always relationships are a two-way street, but part of it is also there's a piece that you have to look at personally and be like, how am I showing up in this family, or what are my expectations? And one thing is like, my family isn't particularly interested in talking about therapy, and it's such a big part of my life. And there's times where that really annoys me, because I'm like, why didn't they ask me about school? Or why can't I have these deep conversations with them that I can have with my colleagues or with my friends? But then I had to think about that, and to be like, well, why am I making that an expectation of them, instead of showing up in an authentic way, in a present way, and allowing what wants to unfold naturally unfold? And this is what I mean about not having expectations. When you don't have expectations, especially of your family, you allow them to surprise you. And so like, there was a time this year where my sister was talking about her grief experience with my dad, and it kind of came out of nowhere, and it really surprised me, because it's stuff that we don't talk about a lot. We talk about it more nowadays, but it's not something that we talk about regularly. And I thought, wow, like if I had been super uptight or trying to force this conversation to happen, it just wouldn't have happened organically in this way. And I'm really grateful that she's unfolding and opening up in the time that she needs to, and that I'm not going to place an expectation on her process, because that actually makes me an asshole. Like when I do that, like it's more about me than about our relationship, and about her and me holding space for her. Yeah, so I had to look at that, about like, what is it that I'm trying to get by having this expectation.
I feel just really aligned right now. I feel like I just shared some similar insights, or had some similar insights come up, where I was seeing the ways that I show up in relationships with other people with expectations for something that other people couldn't give. And then how can I just be present, just be whole and full and here, no expectation, no judgment.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. And when I take that view, then I can see the parts of my sister, parts of my mom that I get that are specific to them that I don't get from any other people. Because for a long time in my life, I wanted my family to feel like how my friends feel, right? But my friends don't feel like my family feels either, you know? And this became very, very clear after my dad passed because I realized if I'm struggling, if I'm actually struggling, if I'm really in a bad place, my family's going to show up for me. And some of my friends might too, but I know for a fact that my family's going to show up for me and they're going to tell me you always have a place to stay, or they're going to buy me a flight, or they're going to DoorDash me some food or something like this. They're going to do something like that. And why have I devalued that because they can't have a conversation with me about attachment styles or something, like it's like I can't devalue what they're showing up for in the ways that like other friends or colleagues or whatever show up for. So, and I think about that too in intimate relationships as well. Like we can just put so much on others. And I don't know, I think about like the difference between having standards and having expectations. Because if there's a standard for respect and kindness and compassion and love, that's very different than like having this expectation of like, I need you to come validate me and come to every show, or I need you to validate me by asking about my therapy program. I need confirmation that you're there, that you're interested in my life, And that was the story that was like, if they don't ask me about school, it means they're not interested in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
there's
been
a
an
difference.
interesting unpacking. Yeah.
Yeah. There's that difference between like expectations and boundaries.
Yeah.
Like vulnerability requires boundaries, but expectations seem to be driven from an unmet need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
At least in the way we're talking about it here, where there's like, but in order to meet that need, I have to be willing to actually acknowledge it and sit with it.
Yeah.
And say, what's really going on here?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Like for me, one of the things that I've noticed is the way that I seek or have sought for other people to fill this kind of caretaker, caregiver kind of role.
Mm-hmm.
And realizing that that's not an appropriate thing to look for in other people.
Mm.
And my parents were never able to really give that to me for a variety of reasons. But I also can meet that need if I'm willing to acknowledge that it's there and see it.
How do you meet that need? Like, what's the process for you?
Well, that is a great question. That is the question for me, I think. It's something I've been working on a lot, actually. For me personally, one of the things that I've been trying to do is work with the earth a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that came up, so I love the modality sand tray. I feel like it's such a beautiful, gentle way to access what's under the surface. And I've always felt really connected to the natural world, like to earth and being outside in the trees. I mean, I studied outdoor education in my undergrad and specialized in like rock climbing.
Oh, cool.
And so
I love that.
Yeah.
I thought you were afraid of heights.
I am afraid of heights.
Well, you specialized in rock climbing, so you're facing your fear.
Totally. Yeah.
I love that.
And so something that is interesting is in a lot of my sand trays, I have these two images that come up often. I have this like earth goddess, like figurine that comes up all the time.
Whoa.
And I have this stag that comes up all the time. And the earth goddess feels very much like Mother Earth, like Gaia. That's the kind of vibe it gives. And the stag feels like like Lord of the Forest. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Princess Mononoke.
Yes,
You know, like
yes.
the Lord of the Forest that they
Mm-hmm.
like cut off its head and then they heal it and then it like heals the whole earth. Like that's the
Mm-hmm.
vibe it gives.
Mm-hmm.
And these two figurines show up in my sand trays, like at different places, different times, never
Mm.
together.
Interesting.
The last tray I did, they showed up together side by side at the very top of the tray, which felt like this archetypal connection to the nurturing generative adult,
Mm.
as if the earth itself was the nurturing parents that I didn't
Ah.
get. So then, as I was able to make some space to really sit with my grief, the
Mm.
feeling that came up, it was like first I cried a ton. Then all of a sudden, there was this really interesting kind of somatic experience where the image of these two figures in my tray came to mind. And
Mm-hmm.
then there was this experience of almost like someone sliding an arm around the back of my shoulders and like across
Mm-hmm.
the back of my body.
Mm-hmm.
And then a feeling of like being held from the soles of my feet
Mm-hmm.
and like a really conscious awareness of breath as an energy transfer
Whoa.
and of like my physical connection to the ground also being a place of energy transfer. And it was this sense of feeling held in a way that I can't ever recall feeling in my entire life. And all of a sudden, it felt like that need for a care, like a caregiver was completely filled.
Wow.
And like I felt like I was stepping through some kind of gate and standing in a new space.
Wow.
Yeah. Where the feeling was like the earth itself is my mother and my father.
And then do you feel like you can, that experience or that feeling is in you that when you need that caretaking, yeah, that you can lean on it?
Yeah.
Wow, that is really powerful stuff. I love that.
Yeah. And so like I kind of feel it like almost like in my diaphragm a little bit.
Mhm.
There's this place of structure and support that wasn't there before.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have a process in ACA about that, which is like you practice a lot with your loving parent, which is like this figure of like, oh, what would the, because it's reparenting work, so it's like what would that loving parent have said or done? And what I like about it is that it takes pressure off your real parents to have had to, you know, restructure what they did or didn't do. It's more like, yeah, you adopt this higher view of like, oh, I'm supported by spirit realm or by my highest self or whatever you want to call it. And it really releases you from, I don't know, what that sticky stuff that like, you know, I used to just really, and I realized this after my dad passed, how bound I was psychically to him because I couldn't get out of that, like taking things personally stuff. But the question is like, with someone who's actively hurting you, you know, how do you navigate that? Because like for me, I was able to go through this process of initiation because he was dying, you know. And I'm sitting with this curiosity of like, would I have been able to get to this place of forgiveness during his life, you know? Like I don't know the question. I don't know the answer to that question, but yeah. But I think part of the answer is in what you were speaking to, is like mm, leaning on that higher power as your protector and guide, and putting less pressure on mom or dad to do that, because mom and dad are just human beings with their own stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was able to see my parents as human beings who carried their own traumatic wounds, I was able to really develop a lot more capacity for compassion for them.
Yeah.
It took until after they died for me to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And part of me wishes I could have seen that sooner. I also had the experience of I would try and then I would talk to them and then I would just get really mad. And it became a lot easier for me when they didn't have a space for rebuttal. But I wonder if there are things that you've learned about this in the workshops that you lead and like the open mic nights that you lead about how do you navigate grief and in a relationship where the other person is still alive.
Yeah. I mean, that was the work that I was doing a lot in ACA. What I ended up developing was very strong boundaries with my parents, particularly with my dad. So I didn't think it would be good to cut him out of my life completely. So what I ended up doing was it would be like, okay, if we're going to meet up, we're going to meet up at a public place like a restaurant, and we'll have a kind of set amount of time, and I won't stay at the house, and I'll stay, with a friend, or I'll just kind of limit the amount of like kind of one-on-one time there is. I mean, it's just crazy the stuff that I had to set up for myself in order to like be with my family that I don't have to do anymore. And then the other thing that I did within practice of ACA and my own spiritual practice was I developed a relationship with my dad's highest self. So I would talk to that higher self a lot in prayer, and I would be like, I understand. I would get deeper understanding about why he was the way he was due to his suffering. And then I would like talk to that higher spirit and just like send prayers and compassion to him with a lot of boundary, which is, it's unfortunate when you have to have those boundaried relationships, right? But sometimes it's like people are so can be trapped in their suffering that it takes them to the edge of death for them to kind of that to fade away. And it's unfortunate that it happens that way, but it does for a lot of people. So yeah, that's a question I'm wrestling with, but it's also just one of those like, why is there suffering questions? Like it's just one of those like unanswerable, why did this work the way it did, and I just believe that we're all spiritual beings and we have a path and a curriculum that we're set to, follow specifically in this life and have specific challenges, and to sort of be okay with not knowing why that couldn't resolve sooner. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. There were just two other things I wanted to ask you about.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm really curious about this creative figure, the Glam Reaper.
Yeah.
And why you have a disco ball in so many of your pictures.
I love it. Glam Reaper. So when my dad passed, I had already been set to go on this trip to Greece to do an artist residency. And so 3 days after he passed, I was in Athens getting ready to go live on two different islands, Paros and Crete. And the first island I lived on, Paros, I had the intention, like, I'm going to go on this artist residency and I'm going to write a bunch of songs. But I was sitting in my grief so much that songs were coming, but they weren't completing. And I was feeling frustrated because I was like, I think I'm wasting my time here was the thought process. So then I went to the store and I bought a little sketch pad and I just started doodling because I got the advice from a friend. Hey, just make art to make art. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to go there and come out with 12 songs. I'm very ambitious. So I had all these expectations on what that time was going to be. But yeah, he just told me just do something else, go draw something. So I started drawing, and I just started drawing Grim Reapers, and it was like around Halloween time. But when I was drawing the Grim Reapers, I didn't make them have a face. Like I made them have like stars for faces. And I thought about um how could I change this Grim Reaper, which is like literally grim and dark, this symbol of like death being something to be afraid of. How could I turn it into this motherly figure that, welcomes you to the other side, and you go on your next spiritual adventure, and you fall into the stars, and you fall into the galaxy. And I didn't know, like, at the time when I was doodling, that that's what she would become. But I had that sketch in my journal, and then a year ago, last summer, I woke up from a dream, and all I heard, it wasn't a visual dream, it was just like a word that just said Glam Reaper. And I woke up just like straight up in bed being like, Glam Reaper, oh my goodness. So I wrote that down, and then I wanted to embody her. And so she's sort of like, she's my archetype for my grief and death journey. So she's a very nurturing figure that is teaching me about making the most of this life, but also like not being scared of death and not being scared of the other side, like really leaning into that, into both worlds. And then the disco ball is like, I don't know, I have to like think about that in a deeper way, but I think it's just this I love disco. I love the Bee Gees. I love ABBA. I love that era of music. And I like how, you can go on a dance floor and it can be dark, but there can be all this light shining because the disco ball is like scattering all this light around. So I think that's kind of another symbol that I like to work with.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that so much.
Thank you.
I have Mamma Mia playing in my head like right now.
Yeah. And what I love about disco, and I really want to make a disco album, is if you can listen to some of those lyrics by ABBA and Bee Gees, like they're working through some stuff, but they're using this, pop disco music to kind of elevate their process. And I really love that because of like, from a somatic perspective, just made this grief album, and a lot of it's rock and folk, and it's like kind of it's sort of like, it's like dark, but it's also like in my heart, so it's like very folky. But then there would be, I have a vision for the next record, which is like, okay, let's work with this in a new way. Let's work with it in like a dance way. Like, how can I dance with these parts? Like, now that I've gone through the vault of like being with the sorrow and being with the grief, and like really in the cave, like what would it look like to step out into the sun and like dance with these dark things? TBA.
That's beautiful. I'm excited to hear it.
Yeah.
Well, this has been so rich.
Thank you.
Feel so much gratitude for your heart and your passion, your creativity, your wisdom. I feel very blessed.
Me too.
I wonder if there's anything else that you would like to share for the people listening.
I would love for the people to listen to Chasing the Light, which is the last song on my record. It's the main lyric, the chorus is, tell me now, have you found what you've been looking for all your life, chasing the light? And it has to do with us really going after those dreams and the things that light us up in this life, and to have the courage to show up for them and to show up for our process, to treat our lives as the gifts that they are. That's been the lesson that death is continuing to offer me. And yeah, that's what I'll end with, is a little blessing for everyone, that they find what they're looking for and really pursue it with all their heart and might.
What a beautiful blessing to give. So how can people find you? How can people connect with you?
Yeah. CaitlinJemma.com, CaitlinJemma.com. I would love for people to sign up for my newsletter. I try to send one every week. I'm also on social media, but I am having more boundaried time with social media these days because I want to be reading more books and writing and being more of my inspiration. So you can follow me on social media, but most importantly, would love for you to go to the website and sign up for the newsletter and stay in touch that way, and look out for the grief events that I host. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of exciting things this fall to look forward to. So
Beautiful.
thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been so rich. I feel so blessed.
Me too.
Thank you all for joining me on another episode of The Fertile Dark. I hope you found the conversation with Caitlin as deep and enriching as I did. Her insights and perspective are beautiful and profound, and I encourage you to go and find her on Spotify or wherever you listen to your music. If you haven't already listened to her newest album, A Wider View, it is worth the listen. The music is deep and soul-stirring in the journey that it takes you on. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, leaving a review. Grief is a beautiful and challenging topic that we all face, that we all deal with, and that is so often difficult to hold and know what to do with. And so also consider sharing this episode with someone that you know who may benefit from listening to it. You can also connect with us on Instagram and Facebook, where we're working to build a community of like-minded, heart-centered people. I'd love to see you there. So until next time, keep delving deep and embracing the journey.